Hello, this is Mrs. Spencer with Clay Virtual Academy. I am the biology teacher, and I am going to go over today with you Ecology Review. This is session 4 of the Biology EOC Review videos. And so today we're going to go over some of the ecology concepts. So we're going to start today by just reminding you that everything is interrelated. Organisms, environment, organisms, all interconnected. And the non-living parts are the abiotic parts, so things like the water, the air, the soil, rocks, all of those types of things are abiotic, humidity, temperature. Biotic are the living parts, so that's all the animals and plants and fungus and bacteria, anything that's living is the biotic. And both are going to affect a population's carrying capacity. By carrying capacity, this is the amount of individuals or population, the number of individuals that can be maintained in a particular area, okay? So they are going to the amount of individuals that can actually live in an area are dependent upon other living things, the other biotic factors in the area, and they're also dependent upon the abiotic factors in the area, the amount of sunlight, the temperature, the humidity, the amount of water available. All those things will affect what is known as the carrying capacity in a particular ecosystem. And again, ecosystem involves all things, not just living but non-living in an area. So first we're going to talk a little bit about how water cycles through the environment and the earth, and this is called the water cycle. And so what we have is two ways that water can actually get into the atmosphere. One way is through evaporation, which is basically the heating of the water until it becomes a gas and goes up into the sky, and then transpiration, which is basically kind of like evaporation, only off of the leaves of a plant, okay, and that's called transpiration. And then there are a couple different ways that water can get back out of the atmosphere onto the earth and into the land. One of those is through precipitation, which can be in the form of rain, sleet, snow, okay, and then runoff. Runoff is basically where from that rain, sleet, snow, the water continues to run down into the lakes and oceans and rivers at the bottoms of mountains and valleys and hills and things like that. And then I also want to remind you that while the water is in the atmosphere, it will condense into clouds. Condensation is basically the formation of the water into clouds. Okay, so that is the water cycle. It is a continuous cycle. Water is constantly going through this. I also want to talk about carbon and how carbon cycles through the environment and atmosphere. Carbon can get put into the environment with fossil fuel burning. That's something that humans do that unfortunately increases the carbon at a higher rate than what normally would happen. So fossil fuel burning. But we also can have carbon getting put into the atmosphere just through respiration. Normal animal respiration gives off carbon dioxide as a byproduct. So that is putting carbon back into the atmosphere. Also, things like forest fires, volcanic eruptions, those are natural occurrences that can put carbon back into the atmosphere. Ways that carbon gets put back into the earth are through photosynthesis, in which carbon is used by plants in order to make sugars. Also, sediment and weathering can basically break down the carbon in the rocks and minerals and things like that and put it back into the earth. And then decomposition of our living things that are dead and decaying, that puts the carbon back into the earth. So that is some of the ways that carbon gets recycled and moved through the earth and the atmosphere. All right, so we have here a food web, and this is basically showing us how energy and matter kind of cycle through living things, beginning with the sun. So the sun is the source of all energy on Earth, okay? And we have producers or autotrophs, like grass and berry plants and bushes and trees that are able to harness the sun's energy and turn it into basically sugar or food chemical energy. Okay, so those are the producers, and that's basically like the first level of a food web. And then we have all these different animals that are going to feed off of each other and these producers. And that's the transfer of the energy from them to each other. And so in this case, this deer eats the grass. So the deer is a first level consumer because it's the first consumer from the producer. Okay? Whereas the alligator eats the deer, which eats the grass. So the alligator would be a second level consumer in this particular case. Okay? If the crocodile eats the frog, however, it now makes the crocodile a third level consumer. So see how the crocodile or the alligator, whichever one he is, it's hard to tell from this picture because you can't see the front of the snout. But anyway, so this particular alligator or crocodile can be either a second level consumer, okay, or he can be a third level consumer if he eats the frog, because the frog would be the second level because the frog eats the caterpillar eats the berry. Okay. Throughout a food web, at all the different levels, no matter what, we also have fungus, and that's what these mushrooms represent. And fungus is going to be found all throughout a food web, helping to recycle and put back the decaying and dead organisms back into the earth to helping recycle the energy. One thing to keep in mind, as we move through food webs, the further away we get from the sun and the producers, the less amount of energy available to the consumer. And that is because there's lots of inefficiency and a lot of waste of energy in the form of heat. So only 10% of energy is actually passed on to the next level. Okay? So there's 100% available from the sun. At the producer's level, it's only 1%. At the first level consumer, it's 0.1. At the second level, it's 0.01. As we, again, only 10% of the energy that was before it. All right. So you get a lot more energy typically from directly eating the producer versus being like a third or fourth level consumer. Okay. However, that doesn't mean that, it might seem kind of confusing because a lot of third and fourth level consumers are huge and big and obviously you're going to need lots of energy. Well, that just means that they eat more things. Okay. And that's how they're able to get their energy. All right. So here's another way of looking at that kind of energy transfer. This isn't a food web though because it's just showing us one of the chains of the eating of each other. A food web shows all the possible interactions, but this one shows the one of the crocodile eating the frog, which eats the caterpillar, which eats the berries. And so you can see here we've got the 100% available, and actually this isn't quite right either because the 100% would actually be at the sun and then moving on. But you get the point. The gist here is just to show you that only 10% is available as you move through. Okay, so you have much more available at the lower levels than at the higher levels of the food web and food chain. So only 10% of available energy is actually passed from one level to the next. And the producers or autotrophs are the bottom always of a food pyramid or a energy pyramid, and then it's the consumers that follow, and they're called first, second, or third, or another way of putting that is primary, secondary, tertiary. Okay, so that means the same thing. All right, another way that organisms interact with one another is based on how they kind of can help one another, whether it's with feeding or behavior. So we're going to go over these 4 different ways that organisms can interact with one another in an ecosystem. And these are all called symbiosis, or ways that they kind of, combine together. Mutualism is the first one, and this is where both organisms benefit. Mutual means together, okay? So both organisms benefit. I've got some examples here of basically hummingbirds and bees having mutualistic relationships with flowers, and that is because the bird and the bee are able to get a food source from the flower, and in the process they help with pollination of the flowers. So they're both benefiting. One's benefiting with the food, the other one's benefiting in its reproductive process. So it doesn't always have to be a benefit food-wise. Commensalism. In commensalism, only one of the organisms benefits, but the other organism is just kind of there. It's not harmed and it's not benefited, okay? So for instance, we've got the shark, and you've got the little feeder fish that are going to help clean the shark off, okay? And so in some cases, some people would consider this to be a mutualistic because they, and actually these are not the same ones, I'm sorry. So these are the fish that actually, they don't clean the shark off. There are some that do that. These are just ones that kind of basically tag along with the shark, I guess is what you would say. And so the shark's providing them protection, but really is not benefiting in any way from them, okay? There are other ones that will actually help clean the shark, so that would be mutualistic, but in these cases this is not. Another example is the nest in the tree. The tree is not benefiting or harmed by this nest being here, but the nest is providing a home and a protective place for the eggs and the bird that is living there. So the bird's benefiting. Okay. Parasitism. Parasitism is where one organism benefits and the other one is harmed. Okay, so this is where one actually gets hurt in the process. I put an example of athlete's foot here. Athlete's foot is actually a fungus. It's where the fungus grows on the feet and actually uses the person's skin cells as a food source. And so it is hurting the individual. The person that has it is going to have lots of pain and itching, and basically, the fungus is eating away at their feet, whereas the fungus is benefiting by having that food source. Another example is this tick. Ticks, of course, benefit from the blood for food, but the organism that has the tick is being harmed in the process. Predator-prey is the last one, and this is where one organism benefits and the other one is killed. Okay, so not just harmed. In the parasite slide we looked at just right here, they're harmed, and the parasite doesn't necessarily want to kill its host because then it's got to find a new host, okay? Sometimes it does happen because it harms them to the point where they cannot survive, but in a lot of cases the parasite is not going to kill the individual, the organism. It's just going to harm them. Whereas in the predator-prey, the organism that is being attacked is killed and is basically used as a food source for the other organism that's benefiting. All right, now let's talk a little bit about human impact on our ecosystems. The first thing I want to talk about are invasive species. Invasive species are any organism that is new or not, is not native to an area that humans have brought into the area and basically are causing a disruption in that ecosystem because of this new organism to the area. A big problem in our Everglades right now is the python, and the python is actually a non-native species. It is an invasive species that was basically, they were pets that were released, and now they are overtaking the Everglades and becoming a huge problem. And so it's destroying some of the other diversity and wildlife in the particular ecosystem that was there naturally before. And that is usually because invasive species, because they're not supposed to normally be in that ecosystem, they tend to not have a natural predator to help keep their populations in check. So they can kind of overrun it and cause other populations to become extinct. The lionfish here is another example here, and this was another one that was thought to be a pet that unfortunately got released into our Atlantic Ocean and now is becoming a huge problem in the Atlantic Ocean, overtaking and killing off some of our other fish populations there. Global warming. This is a hot topic. Not everybody agrees with global warming. The bottom line is there is climate change occurring. We know that. The Earth's average surface temperature is increasing. Now, whether or not humans have caused that or not is up for debate. However, I think there has been evidence shown that although carbon is naturally put back into the atmosphere, and so this increase in the Earth's average temperature is a natural thing that would happen, humans by far do actually have probably increased or at least sped it up by the fossil fuel burning. So we burn fossil fuels and do other things that basically, impact it by making it a little worse. Okay, I think naturally we do put carbon back, and carbon gets naturally put back into the atmosphere, so that's going to happen regardless. But by burning fossil fuels and doing some of the things we do as humans, we add to it and maybe make it a little worse than it would have been at this point in time. So what are some things we can do to help? Well, we can use renewable resources, things that can be replenished over time, okay, and limit our use of non-renewable resources. Renewable resources are things like wind, solar power, trees, fish, okay, all those types of things that can actually replenish themselves. And as long as we don't use them too fast, they can continuously be there and always be around and be continued to replenish, and that's why they're called renewable, because they can continue to come back and be used. Non-renewable resources are things that cannot be replenished. There's a limited amount of them, and once they're gone, they're gone. And that's things like gasoline, oil, and coal, which unfortunately we are very, very dependent upon. So we really need to try to get away from this, because not only are they bad for the environment, but eventually they'll be gone and we cannot replenish them. Okay? So those are just some things that we can do. Try to use more renewable. And that is it for the ecology review. So this was session 4. And again, I thank you for coming and joining me on this. And hopefully, as you are going through these videos, you are getting some better understanding and some clearing of any misconceptions. And we'll be ready to go on that EOC coming up. And I hope you have a great day.